Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I have thoughts. So this is my periodically occurring series of videos where I take a bit of a deep dive into a particular bookish topic or an actual book. So today I'm going to be talking about Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. Editing Anne here to say that there will be spoilers in this video. So I just can't talk about this story adequately without talking about what happens in the story and the things that go on. So you have been duly warned. There are spoilers. If you haven't read it yet, just be aware of that. Yeah, spoilers. Beware. I just recently finished a buddy read of this with Bethany, and we had so much fun reading Mansfield Park. Enjoyed it immensely. I am currently working my way through rereading all of Austen's novels, and this was the last one that I had to reread. Pride and Prejudice and Emma I have read multiple times. Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion and Northanger Abbey I have each read twice now, and now I have read Mansfield Park twice as well. I will admit, when I first read this book, I don't know, a good 10 years ago or more than that, I did not love it. It was not my favorite Austen by any means. I felt that Fanny, and many people would agree with me on this, I felt that Fanny was weak as a character and that not much happened in the story. That was kind of boring overall. So I did not love Mansfield Park, and that's why I saved it for last in my rereading project. I just was putting it off. I didn't really want to read it again. I mean, it's Austen, so, you know, it's not like I hated it, but I just knew I wouldn't love it like I loved some of the others, so I put it off. But boy, was I wrong. Apparently, an additional decade or two of reading experience and maturity gave me a much deeper appreciation, because I really enjoyed it this time around. I loved it. I had a great time reading Mansfield Park this time. I saw so much in it to admire. I think I understood a lot better this time around what Jane Austen was trying to accomplish in this book, and I have a lot to say. Let's get started. First of all, the name of the book, Mansfield Park, is the setting of the book. It's the primary setting for the story. And Mansfield Park is the home where our main character, Fanny Price, where her cousins live. And it's the name of the book. So already you know there's some significance to it. And it is a very prominent setting in the book, in the story itself. Fanny comes to think of Mansfield Park as being her home, even though it's not actually the home that she was born into. She's kind of like was sort of adopted there by her relatives and is being raised there sort of as a charity case. So it's not her home, her actual home, but it becomes her home and she sees it as home. It's representing a place where goodness can flourish. It's representing a place of that is orderly and beautifully appointed. Everything that is the best thing about home. I feel like that's what Mansfield Park represents. Some people I have read where they have suggested that Mansfield Park is representative perhaps of a heavenly home, of like a heavenly abode or symbolic of heaven. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but there may be an idea of that if the best thing about an earthly home is representative of our home in heaven. In that sense, I can agree with that. But it definitely represents the place where Fanny is the happiest, the place where she flourishes, and a place where goodness can flourish and where everything is done in an orderly way. It's well managed, etc. But it's not ostentatious or prideful or elegant just for the sake of being elegant, so it kind of contrasts between two different other places where Fanny goes in the story. And the place where her actual family lives, like her birth parents and her actual siblings in Portsmouth, is a small, tiny, cramped place But even beyond that, beyond the poverty of that situation, Austen really emphasizes that it is a very disorderly and mismanaged place. It is not a place where goodness can flourish. There are things about some of her siblings that are good, like they have some good character qualities, but those qualities are not nourished and nurtured and cultivated because the setting makes it impossible. It's not a well-managed setting. Her parents are not good managers of their resources or of their children, of their house, of anything. And so goodness is not able to flourish there. So there's a contrast there. But Austen is not trying to say that wealthy and rich equals good and poor equals bad, and nothing good can come from a bad family, and only good can come from a wealthy family, or, you know, a family with a certain social status. She's not saying that at all. And I know that's true for two reasons. One, because some of Fanny's siblings, even though they grow up in this, you know, kind of squalid, disorderly, mismanaged environment, they are still able to flourish when they are nurtured and cared for. And conversely, at Mansfield Park, her cousins are given every advantage but fail at life. So she's not trying to say that success is found in a certain social status or level of wealth. The other reason I know that's true is because the third setting, Southerton, which we just visit, but it is an important scene. So the place is talked about a lot, so it's important. Southerton is where Fanny's cousin Maria is betrothed to marry the man who owns Southerton, and they go to visit it. And that is a place where it's all about appearances, and there's wealth there, and it all looks fantastic, beautiful house, and he has all these improvements that he wants to make and everything, but there is no goodness or intelligence or orderliness or understanding on the part of any of the people involved in that setting. Nothing good can come from there either. Mansfield Park is the place where the goodness is able to flourish. Something that caught my eye in this reading of this story was that Fanny had her own special place in Mansfield Park. And I don't know that Austen has done this in any other book, giving you such a look into the private setting of the main characters. I know that it's discussed that Lizzie and Jane talk in their bedroom, and that they share a room. I'm pretty sure that that's mentioned in the book, but there's not any time or page space given to describing that very personal setting. And we don't get a personal glimpse, a detailed look at Fanny's actual bedroom in Mansfield Park. Probably because that would be maybe considered too private, like, you know, too much information for readers of Austen's day, maybe. I don't really know. But she has this other room. It used to be the like the nursery or whatever, but once all of the kids are grown, it kind of becomes Fanny's own room, and she is able to do with it whatever she wants. She's not allowed to light a fire in there, but she can do whatever she wants. So she decorates it, and we really get to see a glimpse into Fanny's personality by seeing her inner sanctum sanctorum. This is her place where she is most herself, and she is free to decorate it the way she wants. And so she fills it with plants and living things, so you know that she is a nurturing person. She fills it with all of her favorite books, so you know that she is an intelligent person. She is a reader. She loves to read. That's always a good thing in Austen's eyes and in Austen's characters. When they love to read, you know that they are a good person, or they usually are. And she also fills it with, you know, things that are meaningful to her that have come from the people that she loves. So you know that she is a loving person, and she loves the people that are closer. She cares about them very deeply. And these things that she keeps close to her in her room, her special room, are reminiscent or reminding her of the people that she loves the most and keeping them close with her. So I really loved that little peek into Fanny's very inner private life that we don't really get to see much otherwise in Austen. And I also love that some of the characters who are central to the story, the three characters who are really pivotal in the story, they all have significant scenes in that room with Fanny. It really is also an important setting that you can't miss when you're reading the book. So that's the setting. Now let's talk about the characters. So I've already said Fanny is the main character, Fanny Price, and she is living as sort of an adopted daughter in her cousin's family. So her uncle, Sir Thomas, and her aunt, Lady Bertram, are raising her from the time that she is 9 years old, taking care of her, providing for her. She kind of is sort of like a governess in the sense that she's not doing any governess duties, but she is kind of like has that status in the family. Like she's part of the family, but she's not. And she does not have all of the privileges that a genuine member of the family would have. And yet she is always in the family circle. She's intimately acquainted with each one of them, and she is related by blood to them. So there is a certain level of intimacy there that a servant wouldn't have. So she kind of has this tenuous position in this household for most of the book, like 95% of the book. Sir Thomas is, I think that he kind of in some ways represents like just like the house is representative of the best thing about an earthly home could be. He's like a father, and he's supposed to be, I think, reminiscent of a heavenly father figure. It's not allegorical to God or anything like that, but I think that he's symbolic in a sense of that, of an authority figure who is loving but also just, and who has definite ideas of good and bad and right and wrong and how that should play out in his family. And he's definitely not intended to be a perfect representation of God, because he has some serious development in the story. He's one of the characters who develops in this story by virtue of his association with Fanny. And while I'm thinking about that, let me just say this. Fanny is a character kind of like Anne in Anne of Green Gables, in that she doesn't change in any way through the story. Who she is, her position changes as the story goes on and things happen, but she, at her core and her personality, does not change. There's no character development in her. She is who she is at the beginning of the story all the way to the end. Just like Anne of Green Gables doesn't have any significant, like she grows up, both of them grow up. So in that sense, they're coming of age stories. They both grow up, but they don't change significantly as people or develop. Instead, what is happening in both of these stories, Mansfield Park and Anne of Green Gables, the people around them are changing by virtue of their association with her. That's where the story is. You're not going to see a character development arc in these stories of the primary character. It's character development in the satellite characters. So Sir Thomas is one of them who undergoes some character development by virtue of his interactions with Fanny. So he's not a perfect allegory of a God-like figure. He is representative of a father, and maybe the heavenly father, but symbolic more so, and not like an actual representation. And then his wife, Fanny's aunt, is Lady Bertram, and she is lazy as all get out. She has a kind heart for the most part, but really she's lazy, and she does not bestir herself to do anything. And in her own way, she loves Fanny, but she doesn't lift one finger for her or concern herself really with Fanny's well-being. And then their children. There's Mariah, the eldest, who is very self-absorbed and self-centered and doesn't really concern herself with anybody but herself. Then there's Julia, the next one down, who is not quite as self-absorbed, but she definitely gets very envious and jealous throughout the story of her older sister Mariah. And she does also have some character development as the story goes on. Not perfect, but it's there. I forgot to mention the older son, Tom. He is careless. Like, he doesn't concern himself with anything. He's not industrious, doesn't really seem to care too much about goodness or being good or doing good. He just wants to have fun. Just wants to have a good time and enjoy himself. And he is very pleasure bent. And then we have Edmund, who is the second son in the family. And he is a very good man. And he is everything that like you think like a noble person should be. That is who Edmund is. And he is very devout. He is a second son, so he has to choose a vocation, but he wants to go into the church. He seems to have like a genuine calling to be a minister. And so he is pursuing that calling, not just as a means of a living, but because as an expression of his true beliefs. And of all of the people in the family, he is the most steadfast and faithful, and he is the one who concerns himself from the very beginning, from the first day that Fanny moves into their house. He concerns himself with her well-being, and he cares about her as a person, as an individual. And he's the first person who really sees Fanny for who she is. And then the villain of the story is Mrs. Norris, who is another aunt of Fanny's. These were three sisters. So Fanny's mom, and then Lady Bertram, and then Mrs. Norris. And Mrs. Norris's husband passes away during the course of the story. But Mrs. Norris is like one of those meddling, managing women who always has her fingers in everybody's pie and is always trying to tell everybody what to do. Doesn't want to do anything herself, but is very good at managing other people. And she is stingy. Generous with other people's money and other people's time, but won't give a dime herself, and is always concerned about saving money and not spending any extra money. She's such a strong personality and she is so unkind to Fanny. I think we could even say cruel to Fanny, that Fanny kind of shrinks away from Mrs. Norris and avoids interaction with her whenever possible, for good reason, because experience teaches her that Mrs. Norris doesn't have any love for her whatsoever. And then we have Fanny's parents, her actual birth parents, and they live in Portsmouth, like I said, and they're not good managers of time or money. What I think is interesting is, okay, so in Jane Austen's other novel, Persuasion, you have Anne Elliot, who has the opportunity to marry a sailor. When he proposes to her, I don't remember what his rank is, if he's a captain yet at that point, or a lieutenant, or if he has any rank at all. But her family is very adamantly opposed to her marrying him because he has no rank, he has no family to speak of, and they want her to be well settled and well married, so they say no. And that's the whole basis of the story of Persuasion. Well, in the beginning of this story, Mansfield Park, Fanny's mom, also Fanny, she, against the wishes of her family, marries a Navy lieutenant. And it does not end well for her. And it's almost like Austen, and I honestly don't know which of these books came first. I think Persuasion was the last one that she wrote, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's almost like we get a peek, like, what would have happened? What if, because everybody thinks, well, including Captain Wentworth, thinks that Anne made the totally wrong choice to reject him when he first proposed, when they were young. But what if she had married him? And we know with the benefit of 10 years hindsight that he is a good man of good character, and he has made his fortune, and he is able to support Anne. But in Mansfield Park, Fanny's mother marries this Navy lieutenant, and that doesn't happen. He doesn't ever achieve his desired fortune. By the time we finally actually meet him in the story later in the book, he's shiftless, good for nothing. Seems like he hangs around at the docks all day and has no vital purpose in his life. He's just gossiping and drinking and being loud and cursing everywhere. So I found that interesting. There's an interesting comparison and juxtaposition of those two things. But that has nothing to do with Mansfield Park. So, Mansfield Park. We have a couple more characters. Oh, so Fanny's siblings. She has a whole bunch of siblings because her parents keep having kids. And then her oldest brother manages to be successful in the Navy, and he rises to the rank of lieutenant during the course of the story with a little bit of help from Fanny's uncle and some other people. And then she has another sister whose name I forget at this precise moment, but again, we don't meet her until closer to the end of the story. And this sister has some good qualities, but she's just really rough around the edges, being surrounded as she is in her parents' home without any benefit of any education. Fanny does her best to teach her what she can, and her sister kind of soaks it up and then moves with Fanny to the Bertram's house, where she is able to flourish and grow as a person. So That's Fanny's actual family. And then there are some other people that appear on the scene partway through the book, and that is Henry and Mary Crawford. And Henry Crawford becomes a love interest of Fanny, and Mary Crawford becomes a friend of both of Mariah and Julie Bertram, but also of Fanny as time goes on in this story. And the two families interact a lot. They develop close friendships. They do a lot of things together. There's a lot of interaction there. I felt like Mary and Henry were some of the best drawn characters in all of literature because they are so complex. They are not cookie cutter characters. You won't meet anyone quite like them in another book. They are not caricatures. They're not one-sided or one-dimensional. They are very multidimensional. There are many aspects to Henry and Mary Crawford. They have many different shades. You can't just say, oh, Mary is like this, oh, Henry is like this. They are multifaceted, like real, genuine people. They are neither wholly good nor wholly bad. And to a certain extent, they play the role of villain at different times in the story, but they are not entirely villainous. And you have some sympathy for both of them throughout the story at certain points based on their actions and their motivations, etc. So yeah, they are very well drawn, imperfect people, and they're very, very human. And I was just really admiring Austen's ability to craft these realistic characters that you feel like could exist in real life. Just very well done. What is this story about? So Fanny goes to live with her cousins at the instigation of her aunt, Mrs. Norris. And you're like, wait a second, I thought you said she was the villain in the story, but she arranged for Fanny to come and live with her more wealthy relatives and get an education, etc. Yes, but she made Sir Thomas think that she would be the one taking it upon herself to take Fanny in. But in the end, she manipulated everything so that Sir Thomas and his family were the ones who actually provided the home for Fanny. So, yeah, she didn't do anything for Fanny. She doesn't actually like Fanny. She treats her very poorly throughout the story. She says the most unkind things to her. She is the one person in the whole entire family who makes sure that Fanny knows she is not a member of the family. And she is just like one step above servant. And in the end, Mrs. Norris is the reason when everything goes south in the family. Mrs. Norris is ultimately a big part of the reason why. So, and then she's like shipped off overseas with Mariah Bertram. So yeah, Mrs. Norris is kind of the villain in the story, but she is also responsible for bringing Fanny into this family circle that we have here. And Fanny, from a young age, begins to fall in love with Edmund, and who is the second son in the family. It's a beautiful friends to lovers kind of story, a lot like Emma, which is one of my favorite all-time friends to lovers stories. And it's very similar in some ways to that. Edmund, for 95% of the story, just sees Fanny, or is accustomed to seeing her as a sibling, like a younger sister to him. And he treats her very lovingly as such. But Fanny is pretty much in love with him from the beginning. But there's a bit of a fatality to it because, or a fatal aspect to it because, you know, she is, you know, from the poor side of the family, and he's her wealthy cousin, and she doesn't think that, you know, his family would ever allow for that to happen. He's got his eyes set on loftier things. And as much as she loves him, she's never thinking that, you know, anything will actually come of it. She's just kind of like, there's an unrequited love, suffering in silence kind of thing going on here. The actual plot, there's not a lot to it. Like, if I describe the things that happen, like, there's a whole bunch of young people in the story, late teens, early 20s, and they put on this play together, or they're practicing on this play while the father is away overseas, checking out his plantations. And then when he comes back, it's kind of like a judgment day, which is another reason why I think Sir Thomas is sort of symbolic of God. There's like a sort of judgment day when he comes back and finds out what they've all been up to. And he puts an end to that, which, by the way, if you really want to understand what's going on with all of that, it's very helpful to read the play. It's an actual play that they were practicing and rehearsing and planning to put on. And it's called Lover's Vows, and it's very interesting. It gives you a lot of insight into what's going on in the story if you read it. But anyway, so then put a stop to that. So the party kind of disbands a little bit. Maria Bertram, the eldest daughter, she and Julia fight over Henry Crawford for a while because they both are interested in him, even though Maria is engaged to marry Mr. Rushworth. Maria marries Mr. Rushworth and moves away from the family circle. Julia goes with her. Tom goes off on his own, doing his own thing, and Edmund is working on getting his, becoming an established vicar and getting a living, and he's like working, so he's kind of in and out. And then Fanny is the constant in the story. She's there. The family circle shrinks down to just her and Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram, with Mrs. Norris popping in frequently. At this time, Sir Thomas comes to see the value in Fanny, and he comes to really appreciate her as a person, and he really gets to know her well. And so her place in the family circle gets stronger and stronger during this period. And then Henry Crawford just decides that he is in love with Fanny, and he is determined to make her love him. And Fanny is adamantly opposed to him from the beginning. Here's where I have a little bit of a rant here in this part of the story. So Henry Crawford he's in love with Fanny, and he initially she's just a challenge for him. He wants to make her love him. And the more she resists, the more he's in love with her, right? It's that sort of scenario being set up. So many modern people today, with our feminist worldview, we look at this story and criticize Fanny for being weak. And one of the criticisms that I have read in Goodreads reviews and whatever, some women will say, or some readers, not just women, but people will say, Fanny should have just married Henry. Just such a weak character. And why was she, looking at Edmund all this time? Henry was, a nice guy, and, he could provide for her, and there's nothing wrong with him. She should have just, given in and married him. And they have different reasons for saying that beyond what I just said just now. But here's the thing. Nowadays, there is a lot of talk about consent. Here is an example from the early 1800s of a girl who is saying no. And this story is written in such a way as we are being asked to admire her for this. She is saying no in the face of pressure from the man himself, pressure from her relatives who are providing for her, pressure from her brother, who is her closest confidant, pressure from her cousin, who is the person in the world who knows her best and cares about her the most, pressure from the family members who don't really care about her but have different opinions about everything. Every single person in her life, pressure from the man's sister, Mary Crawford, every single person in Fanny's life is telling her to give in to him and to say yes and to marry him. And Fanny is just consistently saying no. This is not something that we are supposed to be looking down on her for. She is being strong, and she is saying no. And everyone is respecting her as far as that goes, but they're still at the same time pressuring her to say yes to this guy that she has zero interest in. My thought is, you would think that from a feminist perspective that we would be applauding Fanny for this. Fanny is saying no. Fanny means it. And eventually everybody in her life sees why she said no and appreciates it and respects that in her once a little bit of time passes and more things happen. So I don't understand this. This is a total rant here, but I don't understand why the hate on Fanny for this even from a modern perspective, because, you know, we like to think that back then that women didn't have, to use modern words, that women back then didn't have any agency or power, and they were just oppressed or whatever. Here's the woman standing her ground, and everyone is listening to her. They're pressuring her, they disagree with her, but they're listening to her and they're allowing her to make that choice. In the end, they respect her for that choice. And yet we're dissing on her and calling her a weak character when she's doing what we think that women everywhere should have been doing since the beginning of time, and wishing that people would respect women when women say no. Right. Anyways, Fanny says no to Henry, and she has good reasons, even though nobody else understands her reasons. Nobody else can see what she sees in Henry, the flaws in his character. Now, Henry develops as the story goes on. He grows as a person. Fanny begins to see that there are some admirable qualities in Henry. She sees that there is in him a desire to be a better person than what he is. But she's still not interested, and she still says no. And I think that that makes Fanny a very, very strong female character. And I really admire the way that Austen wrote that whole scenario, and actually Fanny in general. Of all of the heroines, all of Austen's heroines are strong, but their strength is different. Just because they have, like Lizzie or Emma, have strong personalities, like they're louder as people. But that's not where their strength comes from. Their strength comes from their strength of character and from their humility and their ability to grow. Fanny also has that same strength of character, and she is just as strong as Emma and Lizzie and any of the other characters, but she's not, her personality is not loud. She doesn't have a vibrant personality, but she is a strong person. She is a strong woman. She's a strong female character. So anyway, as the story goes on, Maria is married now to Mr. Rushworth, so she's Mrs. Rushworth. She and Henry happen to meet again. Henry is determined to win Fanny, but then he gets a little distracted. And there ends up being a huge scandal because Maria leaves her husband to go off with Henry at the same time that Julia, her younger sister, elopes with a Mr. Yates that her family does not approve of, but in the end turns out to be a decent choice for her, and her storyline ends well. Maria, she and Henry, you know, once they've spent some time together, they find out they don't actually love each other, and so they end up splitting, and Maria ends up with her Aunt Norris out of the picture, out of the family circle. That is the plot. Fanny does indeed end up with Edmund in the end. Although my one complaint about the story is that there's not enough time spent on that development. All along we can see how much Edmund loves Fanny from his heart. And in his mind, he sees her as a sibling, but it's obvious that he admires her for all of her good qualities. He sees her for what a wonderful person she is, and he loves her. He cares about her. He's concerned about her. There's a lot of talk about in the scenes between the two of them, but like they're just always on the same page. They're just emotionally, like they think the same things about, like they have the same perspective on the different situations for the most part. Not always, not perfectly, but often. And all of this stuff, but he's distracted by Mary Crawford, and he really wants to marry Mary, but she wants nothing to do with the church, and she doesn't want to be a pastor's wife, so she's like, And so in the end, he has to give her up, and it's very difficult for him. So when he finally realizes that he loves Fanny, and Fanny is, you know, obviously very happy because she has loved him all this time, we don't really get any on-screen time with that, so to speak, on-page time. Like, it's mentioned in passing, in third person, like there's no conversation. Like, it's mentioned that conversations happen, but we don't get the dialogue. And I would love to have spent it. Like in Emma, there's a whole chapter where they talk about with each other and then with the other people in the circle about how they ended up together. That doesn't happen. I really wish Austen had written one more chapter with that. That's the only flaw in this book that I see. Really would have loved to have seen that happen. But anyways, it didn't happen. So that's the plot. That's the storyline. But what is Austen really trying to say? Many people say that this book, like many of Austen's books, but this one in particular, is exploring vice versus virtue. And I already mentioned that when I gave my quick review of it a week or two ago. But I want to talk a little bit more about that because there's a lot going on here. So I have read some people who suggest that each of the characters, each of the satellite characters in the story is representing a different particular vice. Like maybe Lady Bertram is representing laziness, and Mr. Norris maybe represented gluttony, Mrs. Norris represents stinginess, whatever, different kinds of vices. And that may be true, but I think that may be a little bit too, I don't know, too detailed, too linear for what Austen was actually trying to do here. I think personally, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I feel like she was exploring the value of virtue, and she was exploring how people respond to virtue and how they appreciate virtue. So I really feel like this book is about the value of virtue, not comparing virtue to vice, but exploring the value of virtue. And why I think that is this, because Fanny, no one will argue this, Fanny represents virtue. And as I was saying before, she is a truly strong female character. She has true strength, and her strength comes from her virtue. And in the Bible, it says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her worth is far above rubies, something along those lines, right? In Proverbs. So I think that Austen is exploring this idea with Fanny about the worth and the value of a virtuous woman. Now, in a lot of literature and in a lot of modern thought, when someone says that a woman is virtuous, when they talk about a virtuous woman, they're thinking strictly in terms of sexual purity, which is such a limited view of it. And you would think in this modern day and age, when we supposedly have such this liberated view, that we would understand that there's so much more to it than that, but no. But I digress. That's another rant. Definitely related to the previous one, but similar rant. Anyway, virtue is the presence of righteousness, for lack of a better word, the presence of good qualities, the presence of goodness, the ability to have discernment in a situation and to apply it and to act on it, the ability to know what is right and to do it, kindness to fellow men, compassion, eschewing what is evil in favor of what is good. All of that is virtue. And it definitely, sexual morality and immorality comes into play with virtue. It's part of it, obviously, but it's only a part of it. Like, there's a lot more. So Fanny is the embodiment of virtue here in this story. And that's why she doesn't change much as a character. She is embodying virtue already. And so the question is, how do the people around her, who are, satellites around her, how do they see her, and do they value her? And to the degree that they value her is the degree that they are also virtuous. See what Austen's doing here. So Sir Thomas in the story doesn't have a true understanding of Fanny's value and worth. But when he comes home from being overseas and he sees firsthand Fanny's virtue, when he has the opportunity to compare it with his daughters who fail at virtue, he appreciates it more and more, and he himself becomes more virtuous in the process. And also they begin to have a better relationship. Edmund sees her from the beginning as he sees and he values her virtue and her goodness. Switch out virtue for goodness if it's easier to understand that way. He sees her goodness and her righteousness, and he appreciates it and he values that in her. And he is also a virtuous person. Now he, however, is distracted, as will happen, and this is like so realistic. He is a good guy distracted by a bad girl who just wants him. I mean, she likes him. Mary likes him as a person, but She doesn't want him to be a vicar or a minister of any kind. She doesn't want him involved in the church. She wants him to do some more respectable work. And she's all about vanity. She's very vain, and she's all about vanity and what would look good for her. And she has zero interest in things that are righteous or good. And he's distracted by that because she has a pretty face. She knows how to say the right things. She has a charming personality, and he gets distracted, as happens. So it takes some character development and some things happening in the story to him in order for him to truly realize the worth of Fanny and how much she means to him, to truly be able to appreciate, like Proverbs says, the value of this virtuous woman that he has had next to him all along, this whole time. And then Henry, this is interesting because Henry sees her value and appreciates it. And he actually, unlike Edmund, he sees the value and he wants it for himself. But he is lacking his own goodness. He's not a good person from the beginning like Edmund was. Her goodness just slowly kind of like draws him, and he begins to appreciate it. And, you know, maybe if Austen had chosen to explore that relationship, he would have eventually changed and become more virtuous himself. But as it is, at a certain point, he makes the story, he makes the choice to reject Fanny in favor of Maria, who is beautiful, but very far from being virtuous. And so then he chooses the wrong path for himself. And then Mary, she sees what is good in Fanny, but she doesn't appreciate it. And she tries to change it. She wants Fanny to be more like her, more along the line of vain or whatever. She's not actively trying to change Fanny. She's not mean to her. She has moments where she's kind to her and generous to her, but there's always an ulterior motive, and Fanny knows that. And so they have a very uncertain, tenuous relationship throughout the book. But Mary is never changed by Fanny because even though she sees her value, she does not appreciate it. And then Mrs. Norris never, ever, ever sees the value in Fanny. Neither does Maria. And Lady Bertram, especially when her daughters go off the deep end, she appreciates Fanny all the more, and she grows some. She has some development in character. So this book is really about a profound exploration of the value of virtue and goodness in a person and how it affects the people around us. And it is, I think, an embodiment of the verse in Proverbs that talks about the value of a virtuous woman being far above rubies. Yeah, so that is Mansfield Park, and this video has been crazy long already. But I want to finish up by just saying, when it comes to Austen novels, Austen is my favorite novelist, and now I have read all of her books at least twice. And so the question is always, how would you rank them? Which one's your favorite? Which one's your least favorite? Etc. And I was telling Bethany when we were finishing up our buddy read that, honestly, all of these books are all just, they're all 5 stars. They're all just different levels of 5 stars. And like the differences are minimal. But if I had to put them in any kind of order, I would say that Pride and Prejudice and Emma would vie for first place. Like they're so close. Like some days maybe Pride and Prejudice, and some days Emma. All depends on the day. I like both of them. Persuasion is trailing right there. Right there. I do love Persuasion a lot, and I think Persuasion is very, very wonderfully written. Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park are like right there, just below that. Like, I mean, we're talking like a hair's length here, okay? Right? Hair's width. There's not much difference. So Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park. Right now, I would say Mansfield Park might be a little bit above Northanger Abbey, but only because I read it most recently. Next time I read Northanger Abbey, I'll probably be like, oh, I like that one better. And then Sense and Sensibility for me is actually probably currently my least favorite Austen novel. It just is a little dry to me. I feel like it's a little bit too long and maybe a little bit too much on the melodramatic side. So not my current favorite Austen, but still amazing. Still love Austen. I don't think that anybody tops Austen in their understanding of human character. I mean, I think many authors and many people understand human character, but being able to represent it on the page is a skill that not many authors have to the degree that Austen has. Her insight into human character and her ability to portray it is amazing. And she couples that with some fantastic wit. That is why people keep reading it, because it's funny and it's amusing and it's clever and it's witty, and we enjoy that. And I think that combination right there just makes her my favorite. So even her worst novel on her worst day is better than basically anything else anybody ever wrote. So there you have it. My deep thoughts on Mansfield Park. If you made it this far, give me a little heart emoji in the comments, and I will give you a little heart emoji because I appreciate you so much sticking with me. And also, this is not a one-sided conversation. I really, 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 really want to hear your thoughts. If you have read Mansfield Park, please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything that I said, if you have anything to add, because I love seeing different perspectives on stories and getting new insights on things. So, and also, how would you rank the Austen novels? Do you like Mansfield Park? If you didn't like it, would you consider giving it another try after listening to me rave on and on and on about it? So, anyway, those are my deep thoughts for today, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.